This is Phantom Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air with Katie Turner, and you're a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and you're author of F Toxic Spirituality. Welcome to the Phantom Electric Ghost podcast. How you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thanks for having me here.
Well, it's great to talk to people every day. I'm glad they showed up on our show. Want to let people know that we do have katieturnerpsychology.com as a URL that will be fully clickable when the podcast is published. We're live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch at this time. So that will be clickable on the podcast description if you want to click through on that. We'll talk more about where that goes. But thank you again for being on the show. We always ask these couple of questions of any guest before we start really talking about your story. What motivates you and why do you do what you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's probably like a few different answers I could give. In terms of writing the book, that I do a lot of work. I have a very kind of unique practice in psychology. I went through my own spiritual awakening after I was already in the field. So didn't really believe in any of the like woo-woo world or intuitive. Was very Western trained, a lot of conscious mind approaches. And so like going through that experience really kind of changed my worldview and like what I thought about life and reality. And Western psychology doesn't recognize spiritual experiences very well.
Mm,
I don't know, like the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, there's very few reference to kind of spiritual awakening or altered states of consciousness. A lot of
mm,
stuff there can be concern for things getting flagged as mental illness when it may not be that. It's also like it could be. So it's not always black or white, but I sought out a lot of additional training. It's really like decades of journeys kind of here, but when I so seeing the kind of power of those approaches really informed my clinical work, my work with clients. I do a lot of like deeper processing work, help people connect with their own intuition, and similar themes just kept coming up over and over again. And if you've ever just Googled like spiritual awakening or intuition, you just get such a almost like Wild West array of answers on the internet, and it's really hard to know who to talk to about it. Like our people are hesitant to out of fear of being judged or labeled as like quote unquote crazy.
mhm.
But it's hard to find credible information or guidance. So I just kept seeing kind of I had my own challenges in navigating that path and learned a lot of things the hard way. I also just saw that with clients to different degrees of just belief systems coming up in session or being like, I can't believe I trusted this person, or even some pretty like more extreme trauma from trusting the wrong kind of like so-called healers or teachers in that space.
Mhm.
And I just think like I just had so many one-on-one conversations where I just be talking with people and be like, well, how would you know? Like there's no clear roadmap here. There's no clear guidebook. Um, I know there are a number of professionals who do kind of believe in intuition, have had their own experience, but the kind of research in that area has shown that professionals are nervous about talking about it. There's a,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So it's a totally there. If you're in the Eastern, if you're into mysticism or spirituality, it's not always academic,
Hmm.
or it may be like the Western culture versus Eastern culture. I lived in Japan for a couple of years, so I kind of experienced that kind of Eastern kind of ethos with within Japan, but like the whole idea of spirit animals and Shintoism,
Hmm.
like if you're in that world, it's like that's real to them, and
Yeah.
they don't
Yeah.
have a problem. They wouldn't like label you as having a problem if you're
Hmm.
talking in those terms.
Experiencing
That's
that.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, because it's like that's part of the norm in their
Hmm.
society. But if you're in the Western side and somebody starts to take on Eastern things, it's like, oh, you know, maybe our paradigm doesn't know how to deal with that because it wants to put you
And
in a
our
box.
mental health and medical system doesn't really know how to deal with it well. Like,
Mm, yeah.
I think it's changing. I do think people are starting to be kind of more open. I think it's not like the Western system has all the answers or anything. But it was more just, I think there's a lot of things that I just wanted people to have things to think about, things to do, about how to kind of keep things factors to consider as ways to keep safe on that path.
Yeah.
And I want it to be more accessible for people too, so that like
Well, it's
because I
good
have
that you're
yeah.
offering your services in a place where a lot of people are probably out here, like on the net, and there's a lot of life coaches, there's a lot of shamans, there's a lot of mystics, there's a lot of people
Mhm.
doing stuff, and like, and maybe people feel it's like, okay, I know it's not a doctor,
Mhm.
but I kind of feel this, and no, but if I go to the doctor, they don't talk about it. So
Yeah.
they tend to go there, but then you're talking about people who've had like negative experiences or like bad, like it's not been the most positive situation. So like how do you navigate like so you're going into a zone that I haven't talked to anybody about yet. And
Yeah.
you're the first person to kind of bring this up is this idea of like toxic spirituality, which I can
Mhm.
just, like everybody's seen what can happen on the net.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's even been documentaries and things come out of, like, these spiritual leaders or other things, that's
Yeah.
kind of more extreme end, but it is a hard piece because if you're having, I talk about it in terms of a few different kind of lenses because I think sometimes there's just the spiritual movement and certain spiritual communities or online spaces can kind of go too far into, like, bypassing the human experience and just
Mm.
really only focusing on like the positive and the manifesting and the like it's a good starting point, but it can really kind of mess people up when they're so scared to have any negative emotion or feeling like they're attracting bad things in their life that they should just be able to think positively and get over it.
Oh yeah. It's
It's
like a
like, no,
fantasy.
that's not how human like
Like
our
a sugar
emotions
pill.
work.
Well, yeah, the problem is anything is like it's like I'm a Buddhist, is everything's about balance. The
Mhm.
problem is that people, you get it with the fad diet, you get with the fad this, fad that. And people like to go to polar opposites, like extremes. So
Mhm.
it kind of gets cultish or it gets like in a zone where it's like usually it's something's not always one way.
Yeah.
And when you start getting into a situation where people are telling you like there's one path,
Mhm.
then I tend to be very suspicious of
Yeah, I'd be very suspicious of anyone if they're like, "This is the only way." I think I agree, there's multiple paths, it's about finding what works for you. That may shift over your own journey,
yeah.
and it's also that piece of, like, the title of spiritual beings in a human experience is, connecting with the spirituality piece can be very healing, there's a lot of research that shows all the benefits to it, but it doesn't mean we're not human anymore.
Mhm.
So, it's like we're still in this nervous system that's evolved over hundreds of thousands of years on this planet. Like we're still very wired to survive. We have these like our brain and body stores negative emotionally different than positive emotion. Like we have to work with trauma. We have to work with our nervous system. Spiritual spaces sometimes can really stigmatize people for even considering medication, and sometimes medication can be life
Yeah,
saving for people, and
yeah.
it can be part of a holistic plan.
It's definitely because I'm a cancer survivor,
Mm,
and there's a point like if you get too into naturopathic or holistic medicine, it's kind of a balance. It's like, yeah, I go and I try to get rid of food that has pesticides or additives
mhm.
because I don't need those things. I mean, I don't want to bring the cancer back, so you try to get
Yeah,
rid of carcinogens.
yeah.
But then it's like if I had radiation, I had chemo,
Mhm.
I didn't go and say I'm not going to have that because that's toxic. It's like sometimes you have to
Yeah.
have a balance. Like you gotta have something that's gonna work. So
Mhm.
there's Western medicine that will get rid of the tumor. There's surgeries, there's things that it's like it's not all gonna be chanting to get rid of my tumor.
Yeah.
Like, having chanting as a positive mindset, that's a good thing. But
Yeah,
it's not gonna get
use
rid of the tumor.
everything together, like, try different things
It's
and
not gonna be the one thing that does it. It's like all the things that do it.
yeah, and there can
That's
be I find there's even often more stigma around mental health medication too. I mean, sometimes you like, any medication can be part of it, but I see that a lot in my practice too, as people
there's like a
who, like,
rejection of any
really
kind of
gaslit yeah.
pharmaceutical. Yeah,
Yeah,
'cause it's like
or like you're not trying hard enough or like your spiritual beliefs aren't good enough if you are taking
yeah,
something, which it's not the case. Like if medication's helpful for people, it doesn't get rid of that connection. It can help them feel more like themselves. And then there's the other piece of like because I mean, I'm not saying regulated spaces are immune to harmful people. The majority
mhm.
of most fees go towards complaints. But at least there's anyone in a regulated title has done training and they know better. There's action to take.
Well,
There's
there's ethics,
ethics.
there's
Yeah,
regulations, there's boards, that they have insurance, they have they can be dis like, license removed if they do the wrong
forever.
thing, so
Yeah.
yeah, so there's accountability, A
Mhm.
spiritual advisor, like, what's the regulation group for that? Right, you
There
know?
often isn't a lot, and so that's where it's like some people can have very strong intuitive gifts, and that's a mistake I see a lot. That's a mistake I made early on, was being like, if you have this level of intuitive ability, you're having these spiritual experiences, you can speak on this. Like, I trusted some of the wrong people and was like, "Oh, I gotta get real far away from here." Um, just because it's like those aren't the same thing. It's important to know kind of someone's maturity level, integrity, um,
Mhm.
and I think a lot of in the untrained spaces, there can be a higher likelihood of just you're not as trained to separate your own stuff. You don't have as much training or supervision
Oh,
to know
yeah.
what you know and what you don't know, to be projecting onto clients, to be kind of pressuring people like to sign up for different levels of things and stuff. Like it
Oh,
can
yeah.
get
But
really
a lot of
messy.
people, they have webinars, they have master classes, so is it really all about the spirituality? Is it about economics? So it's like a pure guru, like, might just, "Okay, I'm just doing this because I believe in it."
Yeah.
But if you're doing it because you got a master class and people gotta pay you, like, X amount, right? So you're
Yeah,
are
when I
you
talk about it in the book too, because I think it's like if you're actually a service provider, like a lot of healers, a lot of I've had to do a lot of work around this myself too, because I wouldn't still be in this field if I didn't. Um, a lot of us who go into helping professionals, we really do want to help. So sometimes we have to do work on, okay, how does this be an actual sustainable business model?
Mhm.
And so I think that can be another belief system have that people aren't authentic or they're not real if they're not charging. Um, but I don't think it's that simple or black and white, but it's if they're using these sleazy tactics or pressuring people
The
using
pressure
fear
tactics,
or
like, you gotta
control or being like, well, you're
yeah.
not serious about it, like theirs is the only way, trying to freak people out, then like I would run away from someone
But, like,
doing something like that.
time pressure sales. Like, sometimes
Yeah.
if you get somebody's like, "Oh, you gotta do this within this time," like, anytime you get that time pressure, it feels like a sales pitch
For
rather
sure,
than
and I think there's a difference between being like, "I would recommend you get help for this," or, "These are the kind of supports I'd recommend you get in place or invest in," but it's really important that it's a fit for you, and it doesn't have to be with me.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think
Yeah.
that's the thing when the people are willing to say it's not I'm not the one for you because I
Yeah.
checked out, it's like, and I'm not suited to deal with your, because every it's not a cookie cutter.
No.
Like, if you get these people like one size fits all, and I'm like, how could that be? Because people are so individual and they have their own history, and maybe you don't have expertise, but somebody else does, and you refer.
For sure, and if your rates are too high or you don't have a spot for a sliding scale or something, it's like refer to like someone else who can support them because
Yeah.
I think people with especially with therapy and self-development work, it's there's an element of needing to be invested in it to some level, but that looks very different depending on where people are at.
Hmm.
Like some people, it's like even just a free service showing up, they're very invested, and others, if they have more disposable income, they may value that work less.
Yeah.
But it's not like a paintbrush across everybody. It really depends on the person.
Yeah, it's all kind of
Yeah.
like your means, your class level, your expectations. There's so many factors,
Mhm.
and the cookie cutter thing is always the problem.
Yeah.
But like, so from your experience in terms of spiritual awakening, like, how do you know if you're going through one? Kind of basic. It's
Yeah, I think, like, a lot of times it is kind of this actual experience or sense of feeling, like, connected to something bigger than yourself.
Mhm.
I know it can be very like, it can be a little bit different for everyone. There's no, like, one set path for it. People may have experiences of I often talk about it's the difference between, like, rationally kind of being like, "Is there a higher power?" Whether you call that, like, God, source, nature, like, higher self, like, whatever name you call that. It's beyond an intellectual exercise of, like, here's the reasons for believing it, or here's the argument whether or not this exists, versus, like, a very, like, profound experience of, like, something more is going on here. Like it's not just us. I know when I went through mine, I a lot of the research in kind of more the quantum physics realm was really helpful for that to be like if we are like a field of consciousness and energy and we're part of that, maybe our kind of intuition is almost like bats that can pick up sonar, dogs that
Mhm.
can pick up more smell than we can. It's like maybe this is an inherent kind of human right that we can
Vibes.
pick up on this field.
Yeah, like the vibes and the frequency. I'm into sound
Yeah.
and like frequencies. Like, so as a musician, I know certain frequencies can cause certain reactions.
Mhm.
So I feel like there's vibes. You walk in the room, you pick up a bad vibe.
Okay.
And
Do you feel it for yourself?
I can feel bad vibes.
Yeah.
I also, when it comes to music, I can kind of feel this kind of like, I don't know, this idea of the muse.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
pick up on something and you pick up
Mhm.
on a vibe, and it's like,
Yeah.
then I'm more intuitive toward
Yeah.
that as a musician. I
For
can kind
sure.
of things I feel during the day, I can put into music. I can put into sound waves.
Yeah.
I found I'm in tune with that, so I'm a musician. These like painters, or they feel something, they put it
Mhm.
in the canvas.
When it may be also your dominant way because it's also we all are connected with intuition in some way or another. Like people call it different things. It's kind of like any other skill set where like some kids are naturally really good at math or really good athletes just off the bat. But it is a skill set that if you the more you practice it, the more it opens up and the more
Yeah,
you
it's like the
get. Like
10,000 hours. Like you put,
yeah.
it's like a lot of people, like maybe with even spiritual, awakening, like if you don't know how to access it, or you just kind
Mhm.
of it just happens, but you didn't kind of zone in like why is it happening? Like
For
if
sure.
you start
For
to
some people, it just happens suddenly, and some it is more gradual, like practices like meditation,
yeah,
sometimes yoga, breath work. Like
that's
for
work.
me, I was doing those things and I didn't realize that it would cause that. And so I kind of stumbled into it. But
You
now
stumble
that I know
into it,
more about the research, I'm like, okay, like I was doing the things that would actually like start
get you
this
in that
going.
position. Yeah,
Yeah.
it just seems like there's human beings, we like if we practice, like from an athlete, musicians, like
Mhm.
practice makes perfect. Then you suddenly you have the ability, you don't have to think about it.
Yeah, and
But
it helps to know, like, I have a free quiz and a free series on my website as well too, because it helps to know what your dominant intuitive gateway is, and that usually comes through the sensory information. That's one that we can kind of intentionally keep checking in with,
mhm.
because it intuition and that kind of because it's almost this like personal compass we have that's between us and like the universe or that larger source that will give us messages, give us guidance, like that knowing or that's like you said that bad vibe sense but when you know your dominant gateway you can keep working with that one and it'll keep opening up. It's kind of so
That's cool. I mean, but
yeah.
it seems like, yeah, you do have to be aware. And I've talked to people about like kind of training or reframing your
Hmm.
mindset, or
Hmm.
open, like, so if you had a mindset that was like, I don't believe in spiritualism, right?
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
suddenly you have some kind of thing happens, and suddenly it happens for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you're like, whoa, I was told most of my life there was shame or disgust,
Hmm.
or like I don't believe that, and then suddenly it
Yeah.
happens. So how do I feel now? Do I feel like bad about it? Do I want to
Yeah.
explore it? Like, how do you deal with people who have like mixed emotions about like, they're on the precipice of it?
Yeah, I mean usually for the people who are coming to me because I'm in private practice and people can search for what they want there, you can have a little more freedom in your marketing of like the stuff you work with and the search terms people might use. So I usually find that people are looking for that or they're like referred or heard about my work and that's why they want to work together or it's a big part of it. I also do want to validate like our culture is very rational mind dominant Western culture. Like we don't encourage intuition development or really recognize that it's real for most generations. I think that
Mhm.
is starting to switch now, but we have different time periods in human history where more of that intuition versus logic was dominant. So
Yeah.
most of us were trained out of it at a young age or been like, you're not like, what are you talking about? Everybody's happy. And you're like, but it feels really bad. It's like, oh, the adults just weren't ready to talk about it or deal with it. You weren't wrong. And so I think like for me too, a lot of people we figure like I realized intuition was real after really feeling kind of quote unquote crazy with the way the intuition was coming through and I was like, "No, this isn't happening. Like this person's trustworthy. I sound like I'm being paranoid and crazy and everything was right." Like so I was
You're
like, "This
picking up on
isn't
it.
yeah, like
Yeah,
this
you're
was
picking up
actually
on,
happening."
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you get that vibe, you get that feel. Yeah, you walk in a room and you can
Yeah.
kinda get the feel. It's nonverbal, but it's 'cause it's the cues that you're picking up. It's
Mhm.
stuff that's in your subconscious, it's triggers, it's things you hear, the things you see,
Yeah, some
it's
people get it as
patterns.
vibes, some might get it as a sudden knowing, some people
Yeah.
might get it as an image or like a voice in their head, but it's not like multiple personality or it's not like a
No.
psychosis thing. It's kind of like a self-talk, but it's strong or light. But I think also like how that process works is very different for everyone. So one of the
Mm,
main things I'd want is for people to be it should feel stable and safe. Like I would refer people out if they're really losing touch with reality. Like,
Mm.
because I don't think it's a spiritual awakening shouldn't unground us to the point that we can't function anymore. Like,
Oh yeah,
that
yeah,
may be more of a mental health emergency, and there might be overlap with that, but it's like, I don't think it's a good idea to keep opening if it's destabilizing your life and you can't keep routines, or like people are worried about you. Because sometimes it may actually be, there may be a mental health piece going on as well.
yeah.
And it may overlap with spiritual pieces. And that's one of the dangers of the spiritual community. It can be like, no, no, this is just a spiritual awakening. And it's like, this might actually be like a bipolar episode or
Oh
schizophrenia or something. Like, this may not be only
yeah. Then you can get
intuition.
brought into a community where like suddenly you don't have your regular routine because you're just brought into this. Like, well, no, you can be in this, but if that's very unstable and it's actually not healthy,
Hmm.
you don't want to encourage like unstable, unhealthy. Like you're gonna be like only good in this space, but you're not good in any other space. So
Yeah.
that that kind of is maybe advantageous to people that want to keep you in that space, but it's not advantageous when you have to deal with everybody else in the other spaces.
Yeah, and it's just like, I think it's a good thing overall about how much more mentally health informed we are as a society, but I think there's some dangers or shadow sides in that, because sometimes people like know a little bit of something, but they don't know enough about, it's such an intensive training area to be in, and to know like what your lane is within that, that it does concern me when there's coaches or other people like saying like, oh, I'll help people with spiritual awakenings or trauma or these things, because without, it can go wrong really fast, even for
Mhm.
people who know what they're doing. And if you don't have, I mean,
You're not
psychologist
grounded.
process is like graduate school, doctorate, supervision. At least you're looking at 1,600 hours of supervision to even see people on your own. A lot of coaching things, there may be nothing, or it might be like 150 hours.
Yeah.
So I think there's more room for people to have a whole care team potentially, whether it's like some spiritual healers, advisors. I'm not saying Western has all the answers, because I don't think we do the best job of helping people through those. Um, but also, yeah, it's that again, spiritual being human experience. Like, how do we
Well, you're
function in both
weaving.
worlds?
Well,
Yeah.
you're weaving the kind of like the balance of having the medical practice and all the rigor that goes into making sure that you're actually qualified.
Hmm.
And people don't go to a surgeon without knowing that they've done the hours and they've done the surgeries, they've done the work.
I hope not. Yeah.
I would think. So but people come to like something like spirit. Well, it's not the same. It's like, but it could be
Hmm.
that if you don't have those fail safes, if you don't know how to deal with stuff if it goes bad, because you just say, oh, it's always going to go good. It's like, well,
Yeah.
that might not be the best mind frame to have because I don't want a captain of a ship that's never gone through a storm.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not saying like, I think there's really great healers out there and people who are doing really fantastic work. I just think it's harder when people are in a crisis state where they're already vulnerable, being like,
Mm,
who
maybe
do
that's
you
not the
trust
best.
or not?
Yeah, maybe if
And
you're in a crisis mode, it's not the best person
yeah,
to go to.
and I hope it, like, part of my hope and kind of speaking on your podcast, like speaking more publicly about it, is like, I just want to more encourage like dialogue for people and be like, this can be real. And I think professionals need to be kind of more open. Um,
Yeah, and
maybe it may be working with like consulting with the right people, having people who, because it's hard to find it all in one place, and people
yeah,
may not
so
have
you need a
access to someone,
balance.
but yeah.
Yeah. Well, you might not just have one person you deal with. Maybe you need to also consider, and like you pointed out, like Western medicine may not know how to deal with this kind of spirituality.
Hmm.
So then people tend to not deal with medical doctors because
Yeah.
they can't find it. But you're opening up a space with like, hey, you want to entertain that, but do you find that are there enough doctors out there besides yourself that are providing this capability?
Yeah, well, I'm not a doctor. Like, I'm a psychologist, so
Like,
I don't have prescribing ability or anything like
okay,
that. That would be a doctor or psychiatrist. I think there are some, but the ones I know of, again, most of the people I know are, it's not the norm. I know a number of like regulated professionals who they are open or they've had their own experience, but there's a fair amount of research around academics and professionals who had spiritual awakenings, who've like significantly changed the course of their life or work. Most of them don't talk about it like professionally or publicly, because
mm,
they almost call it the divided life. And I lived that for a long time too, just having it in like partly in the closet, partly out. I do think like if anyone's looking to explore this or develop their skills in it, I really would recommend making sure you have your own training and getting very skilled in the intuitive piece before you ever start working with clients with that. I didn't just do it overnight. I went through a
Mm,
lot of different training and mentorship for years and years outside of psychology and within psychology to be like, what are the evidence based and like
mhm.
accepted theories to kind of bring this into already. And yeah, so
So
it's a yeah.
so when you started, like you said, there's like resistance in the field of psychology to like going into this from what you've been saying, right? But now it's getting more open where people was there like people fear of being judged or being ostracized or being put on outside of the community if you go toward this? Is there some kind of penalty?
Well, there definitely would be penalties if you're not like you have to follow your ethical regulations in peace. So I wouldn't recommend any registered professional like read your know your code of ethics, know what your standards are. I'm not doing unregulated like energy work or other things. Like I it's based in like energy psychology, which I've trained in. It's based
Hmm.
in transpersonal psychology, which I've had training and mentorship in, internal family systems, like family constellation work. So it's kind of like this, but the spiritual awakening stuff drew me to all of that because I was like, okay, I'm seeing, feeling, sensing like stuff with people's inner child, like hearing, seeing what's going on there, stuff with ancestral fields that's
Hmm.
contributing to this issue. Sometimes it goes into things like past lives or like and one of the positive of the spiritual is like there's the heal, it can bring attention to what needs healing, and it can also bring in kind of support and a real sense of guidance, a real sense of like unconditional love. um and sometimes that can be, I mean, one way to experiment with it too is to kind of ask for answers and be open to the synchronicities that come through and that show up. And there's a really cool book called The Awakened Brain where she stumbled on kind of spiritual awakenings and the power in mental health, wasn't looking for it. But she does a great job of talking about the neuroscience of how our brains seem to be designed to actually communicate with this like larger field of consciousness.
That makes a lot of sense because you feel like there's a lot of energy in the universe in the world, and we
Mhm.
can, this seen unseen. And then
Mhm.
as people do research, they start to, maybe map what's going on in the brain, and then you can
Mhm.
actually statistically and through evidence based science, prove or start to build a body of
Mhm.
work that this isn't all foo foo, right? It
Yeah.
isn't all just faith based. Believe it, I can't prove it. Right?
Mhm.
That you can start to be able to show that there are some things that you can see that
Yeah.
make like there's not just a like you have to just believe in it
Yeah.
to go into it. Some of the things seem to be like, in that vein where it's all kind of like like a religion. You have to believe it. You have to kind of have that
Yeah.
bit of
I'm
that.
not a big fan of believing. Like, I wouldn't believe it if it haven't had enough evidence for
Yeah.
it over
Yeah.
time. And that's one of the things of like, oh, you just trust the process. I'm like, you don't have to fully trust it. Like, the trust develops. Like, trust is a relationship. Like, you got to be able to learn like what's pure intuition, what's your mind jumping in, and when it's actually accurate and helpful, and it over time you get more information that confirms it. It's like then you build more trust
To trust in the
in
process.
it. And I do think on a collective level there is more of a kind of reckoning with the impact of basically like colonial and patriarchal systems that have existed for so long that are this like separate individual, like humans are at the top and we can kind of destroy the environment and
Yeah.
like it's just your thoughts versus like no, these aren't new concepts, like
These
it
are old. I mean, there's a lot of like,
yeah
well, I mean, I'm part Native American,
yeah
Cherokee, and Blackfoot, and there's a lot
yeah
of, Blackfoot and Cherokee
hmm
oral history. There's a lot of spiritualism and the spirit animals, connection to Gaia, connection to the
for
planet.
sure
And in
yeah
a lot of indigenous cultures, they felt like animals have sentient, right?
yeah
Animals
yeah
aren't things that you can just, aren't don't feel, don't have heart, don't have soul.
for
So if you have a
sure
mindset and a belief that's like that, you're more open to spirit animals. You're more open to
yeah
like a mysticism. You're more open to the old stories,
yeah
but about the different elements and different powers of things that are beyond just like some religious concept, but it's
hmm
more connected concept. It's more sustainable.
it's a very experiential, like it's a
Yeah.
very like it's not a believing, it's a 'cause for me,
Yeah,
it's not believing, I'm like, I know it, like, I've had
yeah,
too many experiences that I can't explain that it's just there's definitely something going on, and, um, yeah, and I think, like, that's part of the toxic spirituality part too, is really wanting to bring people's attention to be like, where are these, like, capitalistic, consumer-based messages, like, now
yeah,
whitewashed into a spirituality? Because it's like,
yeah.
these work like, it's always like, "Oh, manifest this money and think about the $1,000,000 paycheck and these things," and it's like, this is about soul development and, like, collective consciousness, like, our
And you're
soul,
mixing,
yes, money may be part of that, but our soul doesn't really care about money, like,
well, it's kind of
it's not so
Calvinistic.
materialistic, like
Well, Calvinism was this idea that if you're the richest people were closer to God, because if
uh,
you're a billionaire, you're closer to God,
yeah, yeah,
because, like, you must be good
yeah,
because you have wealth, but that's not
yeah. It's
necessarily
so
true.
not true, like, you
Yeah,
can be
right,
good with money or terrible with
just because
money,
you're a
like, yeah.
billionaire, trillionaire doesn't mean you're the best moral person. You could be the most
No.
immoral,
Yeah,
selfish person, but if you have this mindset that that puts you closer to God,
yeah,
then you get this idea that, "Whoa, we're making money," and it's like a Calvinistic kind of, like, it's a philosophical argument, you can get into philosophy,
yeah,
but, like, when people kinda take that capitalism and then mix it with the spirituality, then
yeah.
mix it with, like, a sales
Yeah, a
pitch.
lot of, like, almost, like it's probably a lot of, like, kinda to be fair, like, it's a lot of almost, like, white teachers who's, like, studied with other things, and they take stuff from teachings and, like, water it down,
And change it,
and then
yeah.
it makes it very consumer based, like, it's very material, and it's very, like,
It's like the
they're
blues, like,
selling
it's
too.
yeah,
Yeah,
you have a Mississippi bluesman, and then you have somebody take it and to kinda water it down
yeah.
and make it so it's like, well, that doesn't even feel like the blues anymore.
Mhm.
Like, it's like, so there's a lot, as a musician, we've kinda, I'm African American, but it's like
Yeah.
we have had a lot of feelings, a lot of musical types
Mhm.
are kind of jazz, blues, rock, kinda all come from, like, African American base, and
Yeah.
then people will say, "Well, rock and roll is this." It's like,
Mhm.
"Well, no, we kinda invented it, but you kinda
Yeah.
took
You kinda took it from us.
it," and
Yeah.
then I understand, like, you're the one. I'm like, I don't think so."
No.
Lead Belly, Robert Johnson, they're the one.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, "You don't got it." It's like, "Do you know who they are?" It's like, "Oh, I know Eddie Van Halen." It's like, "You never checked out Lead Belly?"
Yeah.
But, like, the people don't go look for the source. Let's say, oh, they look at the person who kinda, like, took a
Mhm.
piece of the source
Mhm.
and then, "Oh, like, I'm gonna run with it." It's like,
Yeah, and then we got a lot of stuff that's really, like it's kinda just feeding people's egos in certain ways, like, whether that's intentional or not, and there's nothing wrong with the ego, we need the ego to operate in the human
yeah,
world, like, we need it for day to day, but it is, like I think it's, like, the soul's supposed to be the guidance, and the hard part is if we're always chasing these with the consumer materialistic world, it's kind of we're always sold and trillion-dollar industries like are intentional about this to be like keep chasing this thing like the
right, keep
promotion, the
chasing it.
title, the
Yeah,
money,
yeah,
the
yeah,
house, the cars, the
doom
and
scrolling to
it's
get your
yeah,
money.
and it doesn't like definitely money can make a difference for happiness, but the key difference is when people don't like when they're have enough to be secure. Like when they have enough to make their basic needs and beyond that it's not a clear-cut relationship. There's a lot of
Yeah,
factors that go into it
yeah,
and
why
there's
do you
many
want
things money can't buy. Yeah.
well, why do you want the $1,000,000? Because people say want the
Yeah.
$1,000,000, but I would ask is like, what are you actually trying to have? Do you want peace of mind? Do you wanna
Yeah.
have control over your own business, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to have $1,000,000 business to be in control of
Mhm.
like, idea. You
Yeah.
could have a business that never even hits that kind of number, and you could be happy.
Yeah.
But if you think the $1,000,000 is gonna make you happy, it's like you're not, it's like, it's just a number, and usually
And
when you hit
usually
that
people who
number,
reach that without doing the work, then it's more and more
yeah,
and
then they
more.
need
Yeah.
more, you need this, need that, you need the next thing, because you need to
Mhm.
be satisfied into, like, what is your purpose? Like, what
Mhm.
are you trying to tell your story?
Yeah.
'Cause people are always kinda, go after the Joneses, or they're going to, like,
Mhm.
I guess the comparison trap,
Yeah.
and then you have,
Yeah.
like, people with imposter syndrome, like, so then they're always trying to compare to, like, "Oh, I knew kids like, oh, I wanna be like
Mhm.
Jimmy Page." And if
Yeah.
they couldn't
Yeah.
be like Jimmy Page, then they're not good.
Yeah.
Is it would,
Yeah.
like, to me, it's like to be your authentic self as a guitar player,
Mhm.
that's more interesting as a producer than you trying to be Jimmy Page, because
Yeah.
there's already
Yeah.
a Jimmy Page.
Yeah.
So if you actually show me, and it doesn't have to be perfect, because everything about an individual is your secret sauce.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're kinda told, like, "Oh, you gotta be like with that person's got the 1,000,000 views, like the cat
Mhm.
video." But
Yeah.
there's how many cat videos? I'd rather see somebody that has something that's unique and we got, like, that doesn't have a lot of views,
Yeah,
but he
yeah.
actually talks to me. That speaks to me, and people have been kinda told, like, "No,
Mhm.
no, no, you gotta be on this super high, you know, like, rat race. You gotta
Yeah,
jump on that
yeah.
train," and I don't think you have to be on that train to be happy.
No, I think there's risk with being on that train, like, there's a whole other set of problems that come with that for people, and, I mean, people can be there and be happy, but there are certain things where at a certain point, like, once you can kinda meet your basic needs and have basic kind of security, it's, like, usually mindset practices, like, how you're spending your time can be more helpful, but we're also I think it's also we are pretty, like, socially disconnected, and, like, a lot of times we're busy and just hustling to survive, and people look for quick things to, like,
Yeah, the
have a
quick
quick
fix.
feel better, and,
Fast food, therapy. Is it
yeah.
kinda like junk food therapy? Like, because the people are so into the 15-second, 30-second, 10-step thing, right?
Mhm.
Gotta have immediate results in what 5
Yeah,
sessions, like,
yeah,
in 30 minutes, or, like, everybody's the thing is, like, once you get into a practice, you've gotta probably maintain, and if you
yeah,
can't maintain, then
yeah,
it's not sustainable. So anybody who puts you into
mhm.
something that it puts you through hoops, is like, there's no way you're gonna sustain that for the next 30 years. So
Yeah,
it's
and
probably
there's,
next.
like and Soul Path is just, like, almost like a spiral staircase where it's, like, you keep coming back to stuff. There is no, like, full arriving. You move through
Never
things, you
done.
evolve,
You're
like,
never
you're a
done.
different version of yourself, but you're never gonna be done, and some of the stuff like, seen for in my own work and other stuff across, like, themes across lifetimes and other stuff, you're like, "Okay, so if this goes even beyond,
Yeah,
like,
like,
whatever
bonus is
people's
believing,
belief
like, your
are of,
last
like"
life is
Yeah.
you have multiple lives and you're trying to get to this thing, you might be repeating it because you never lear you can't get out of that karma.
Yeah, well,
And
and even, like, quantum physics around the universe is, like they have evidence or suspect we're on, like, our 4th Big Bang. It's like if the whole nature of the universe is, like, this evolution and change,
it's
it's
not hitting
like
a wall and coming back and doing the big bang again.
Yeah.
Even the universe expands and then hits a wall, and then kinda goes backwards,
Yeah.
back to the bang. So that's so, well, human beings are part of this. So we
Mhm.
go through this kinda ebb and flow.
Yeah.
You're like a wave, you got the crest and the things aren't always people, I think, have some intention of these idealized things that everything's always gonna be okay,
Yeah.
or everything's always gotta be hyper this. And
Uh-huh.
sometimes it's not like that. Sometimes you have to live life as it comes and just know how
Yeah.
to deal with it. And it's like, as I always give an example, as a musician, if you there's no bad note, there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
But if
Yeah.
you treat it as a bad note, then you'll restart the song.
Yeah.
You treat it as an opportunity, you'll evolve the song and actually pick a different chord, pick a different pattern, and keep the song going.
For sure. And human, like, we have basic emotions that are recognized across cultures. Like, they serve evolutionary purposes. We're not here to not feel sadness or anger or, like, and I mean, I think we can shift our relationship with them. It doesn't mean it's letting those emotions, like, drive the bus of our behavior. Usually that's more the path, like the maturity path or the evolution is being like, how do I feel this? Ride the wave, like, bring it down so it's not controlling how I respond in the moment. It's not about letting those take you over, but it's not about being so scared of them that it's like, oh no, only positive, only gratitude, only love and light. Like, we can't focus on any of that
Yeah,
because
we have
it's
to
yeah,
learn. I mean, your lesson learned. I mean, I'm a
yeah,
software guy, right?
yeah,
We always hit a bug. We always have a problem we didn't know, right?
yeah,
So we know what we don't know. We don't. So
yeah,
the thing is, like, we instead of trying to be perfect,
yeah,
we went to this idea of agile or
yeah.
iterative development. So we
It's yeah,
know that every day, even though we put it out there, that we can
mhm,
improve it,
yeah,
right? And so even if there was a defect in our last version, we can change it. So you live a life like, yeah, I could have a problem, but if I can learn from it
yeah,
and not obsess about the past, but actually find something in it that I can actually do better. And know I
mhm,
could maybe not meet the mark, but at least I'm gonna not obsess about it and get pulled
yeah.
into this resentment or pulled into this cycle where I just keep on obsessing about one bad thing, is instead of actually trying to figure out what did I learn from this
For
moment?
sure. There's like a balance between being because if we're bypassing our emotions and just being like, no, no, I'm only looking at the positive. I'm not going to feel anything bad. I'm just going to push this down. When we drive those emotions into more of our unconscious or like subconscious, it's like that has the power to sabotage us way more than actually
Mhm.
just being able to, where's the space to feel this, to move through it, and then get back into the gratitude when you're
It's like
actually feeling ready for that, but like not to rush it. And we have waves of that at different things. Like hard stuff happens. Like we
it's
can
like
have
the
that
art.
soul connection and still have to be human.
Well, it's like the art therapy. Like, do you take
Yeah.
that bad event that happened that made you write
Yeah.
the song? Like
Yeah.
James Taylor, "Fire and Rain."
Hmm.
He was going through like heroin addiction, and he
Oh
wrote
yeah.
the song, and it's like
Yeah.
it's very cathartic. A lot of people, it's universal. But
Yeah.
when you can take something that bad happened to you and
Yeah.
then turn it into a cathartic moment that comes universal and everybody can kind of feel it, then
Yeah.
you can process something even though it was hard.
Hmm.
You find a way to get through it. Now, not everybody, well, I'm not an artist, so I can't do that. But like you can take
Yeah.
those moments and still apply them, whether it be you're an artist or actor, or
Yeah.
whatever, you can still find a way to apply it.
Yeah, and so, like, especially in tragedy or loss, like, that spiritual, I mean, Western culture doesn't do a good job with grief or death or loss in general. Oftentimes when people get a diagnosis like cancer, people are like, "Oh, here's, like, positive things," and this person, it's kind of this, like, pressure to, like, cure yourself of cancer,
Mhm.
and
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, there can be really positive stuff, but, like, soul level is, it's like we're all actually gonna die. And
yeah,
we don't always get to control that on a personality level. Like it's not a spiritual failure if you get ill, have a chronic illness, can't heal yourself. Like sometimes that's actually part of a life path. There may be room
yeah.
within it and be like, like, how can I live the best version of my life given these circumstances? But even like I, with part of my awakening too, it's like I had mediumship abilities open up, but it's so sometimes if with loss, people will go like, oh, well, like, oh, they're in a better place or they're like, at least they're with God or wherever. But I compare it, it's like, even if you can still talk to them, it's like they've moved across the world and there's a bad
Mhm,
Skype connection, like, you still have to grieve them. They're still not actually, you can't hug them anymore, they're not physically here, like,
mhm.
and not everyone can still even have that communication come through, but so it's like, yes, that can be true on one level, and we need to have the space to actually grieve as well, and
The grief is a
yeah,
real thing, and you don't shouldn't, like, avoid it or try to, get around it. Like, a lot
yeah,
of times you have to go through something even though it's hard.
yeah,
You have
yeah,
to, like, as a mountain biker, I gotta climb that hill unless I've got
mhm,
a, like, electric bike that's gonna climb it for
yeah,
me.
yeah, yeah,
It's like part of it is, like, I actually have to go through the work to actually climb it,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
And it's actually gonna take effort to be able to do that, and then I gotta hang on coming down the
mhm,
hill.
yeah,
So I can't get myself so worn out climbing that I
yeah,
can't handle coming back down the hill.
mhm,
So it's like you're always just up and down. The mountain bike is like this
yeah,
up and down thing. Physical with
mhm.
example, but it's like life, like spiritually, you can, through your soul, you can run into those kind of waves.
Definitely, because it's like we're here on a human journey too, and part of this, like, this world, this life experience is a range of emotions, and we're not ever gonna a place where we don't feel all of them at some point or another, like, um, and we also go through hard things. So it's like we can get better at developing resiliency, like knowing what to do when we're going through hard things, like taking care of ourselves through it. But there's no like way to completely stop that or, and I don't think, and even if there is a piece, like I'm not there yet, if there's this enlightenment state where you never feel any of that ever again, it's like, okay, even if that exists, I still think you would just naturally get there at some point. I don't think you would get there by pushing everything away to be like, I'm not allowed to feel any of this because I need to just be here. Like that
No,
won't work. Yeah.
no. I think like I don't know. I've always had this feel like you got to take it like the whole like I don't know if you think about it, expansive, right?
Hmm.
Rather than narrow lane. I think people like to put things in boxes.
Hmm.
And a lot of times there's things they're crossing. And then that's
Yeah.
hard because people like they don't want to have all this noise, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
want to be able to simplify it and say it's
Yeah.
hey, it's black, it's white. But when they run into the grays or you run into the colors,
Yeah.
right? The shades and it's like you could color something and then becomes
Yeah.
like, oh, I just mixed all these colors and now I don't know what I got. And it
Yeah.
used to be green, it used to be yellow, but now it's this.
Yeah.
People are scared of when it becomes this.
Well, and I
And
think it's like the unknown and the uncertainty is scary. Even just with many of the therapist groups I'm in, just seeing it's such an interesting landscape in the last like 5 years or so too, with being in these major world events that you're in it too, and so are your
yeah,
clients. And I'm
it's
so
scary.
grateful that I have these like processes to take people through because it's just like we can. you can guide people to reaching these states of consciousness where these messages are just coming through and they're leaving feeling better than when they came in. And I don't know if I'd still be doing this work if it was just conscious mind strategies alone, because I don't know what I would say with some of these world events or other pieces to be like, oh, just like it's not that bad. Like some stuff feels really bad.
And we're pretty bad. I mean, the world events can really depress people. And I was
Oh
a
yeah.
political science major,
It's
so I
yeah.
do keep a good eye on it. But it's like I can't obsess about it. I can't be watching
No, no, it's not
MSNBC,
like obsessing everything.
CNN,
It's
Fox
like,
News all day.
yeah, I think we're
Then you
each
get
drawn to
triggered.
like what's our unique light in the world or what's the work we're
Yeah,
called
you
to.
get
It's not to
triggered.
take everything on, because if enough of us do our own work, like hopefully that can shift consciousness enough. And again too, I think a lot of this stuff is like it can be a scary, isolating place if we're just this lone little ego human in this like cold, uncaring world. Where a lot of that like chase for money, other things sometimes comes from a place of like, if I have enough, then I'm taken care of and then I'm going to be okay.
Mhm.
And the actual like spiritual connection piece is like, if you're connected with that guidance, like that connection with you in the universe and that relationship, like you will be okay no matter what.
Yeah.
And you can keep returning to a place of okay and loving. And even when really awful things happen, you can actually navigate that in a different way or feel more okay than you would have thought otherwise.
Yeah, I think people kinda soldier on with individualism,
Hmm.
and then sometimes it's like, we're very social people,
Hmm.
and
We're
if you
social species.
yeah, and if you go and set
Yeah.
yourself up with this armor, which
Hmm.
is your $1,000,000 and your security system in your house and all your wealth and all that,
Yeah.
then you kinda isolate yourself, and then
Yeah.
you kind of then start making judgments about
Well,
people
and
who might
loneliness and isolation actually starts changing the brain, so people are more likely to create situations where they're more lonely and isolated. Like it
yeah,
becomes very self-fulfilling, and it's a dangerous cycle
yeah,
because
you just
we are
become isolated.
wired to connect. Yeah.
Yeah, if you isolate yourself because you got all that fear, because the safety,
Mhm.
so your
Mhm.
safety is building all these walls.
Mhm.
You build all these walls and they're not connected, so there's no empathy. And like what you need is actually the human connection, but
Yeah.
you're pulling yourself away from it. So like
Mhm.
if you can actually find ways to, not every connection is going to be great, but
Yeah, and it's different for every person too, because sometimes if people do have I do a lot of work with like complex trauma as well. And so sometimes it's like people with more of a trauma history, depending on like how early that is, the experiences they've had. And that's another issue I have with some of the spiritual messages when it's not trauma informed at all. And a lot of unprocessed trauma can be potentially dangerous to increase spiritual awakening because that awakening can become traumatic or dramatic.
mm,
And so I think it's also like sometimes you might need to work, like if you have access to trauma therapy, to medication, to build that in slow, safe ways. It might be connection with animals, like because
yeah,
like if people are like, oh, just think positive or just envision the life you want, it's like, well, we also have to work with the nervous system where it is and help it move
yeah.
through. So there's enough safety and stability there and enough emotional regulation that people can actually start
But you might
engaging in
not have
different
the
ways.
tools to handle all the trauma. So
Yeah,
then you could
exactly.
have like an incident or you have like you're like,
Hmm.
your exposed nerve
Hmm.
and you can't really just sugarcoat the exposed nerve, you
Yeah.
know? So they might need medication, but if they get people, like you said, that are kind of down on
Yeah.
medication or down on
Mhm.
certain things, like, to me, it's like you should look at everything that's gonna help with this particular situation without having, like, I think you should be open. Openness to
Yeah.
me is openness to actually challenge your own belief system.
Yeah, for sure.
So then if you're like a scientist, they find, "Oh, this law doesn't work anymore," right?
Mhm.
And we just found out that it's not, or Pluto's a planet, Pluto's not a planet. And they're not
Mhm.
gonna go and say, "Well, I can't believe that." But like,
Yeah.
well, there's
That's
new evidence,
yeah.
there's new criteria, so things
Yeah.
change. But if you're so rigid,
Mhm.
then you can't. And so I don't know if I want somebody teaching me that's super rigid. I'd
Yeah.
rather have somebody teach me that's more open.
For sure. When I think openness is like people who kind of know their area of expertise, but are open to like what they don't know. And
Yeah, you
that's
realize
kind of the red flags
mm,
I'd look for too. Cause I've seen some fairly popular spiritual leaders and stuff. It's just like they talk about every topic. And it's like some of
they
the stuff
ignore
I've heard
everyone.
people say about narcissism or like why empaths attract narcissists. I'm like, this is actually wrong. Like I've done training in this. Like there's research that exists. Like you're spouting nonsense and you have millions of followers. And
Yeah. Well,
And
the
you
that
don't
the
seem to
algorithm
know what you know and what you don't know.
well, the
Yeah.
algorithm doesn't always go for who's got the guy actually know what they're talking about. The algorithm kinda
No,
goes for flash.
it does. It's a little
It's
bit
kinda
scary.
like a sales pitch. It's like you go for it's the snake oil thing. They'll sell a
Mhm.
lot and it doesn't do anything.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
back in the old days when people were selling all these remedies, most of them
Mhm.
just had alcohol in them,
Yeah,
right? And it's like or they had codeine in them or they had
yeah,
something in them, and it's like it really wasn't doing it. It's like it was a trick. It was like it
yeah.
was just a con. So
When social media stuff too, it's like more and more people kind of I think there's more and more people feel more and more pressure to have an opinion on everything, and there's less recognition of like you can be really skilled in a certain area or help people with a certain thing, but it's like that's
Mhm.
the thing I would look for. Like it's not bashing coaches or teachers, but it's really being like know your lane of expertise, who you can help, and the limits of your competency, and like have the humility and self-awareness to know like this might be a little bit out of my scope. So
Yeah,
maybe you
I
can
gotta be
work with them
honest.
as long as they're consulting with someone else around that issue. Um, yeah, because it's yeah, with the mental that it does worry me in terms of I saw someone who was like a reader or something gave a talk on depression and I was like, "Why are you talking about depression? Like there's no credentials here. Like depression comes with a high risk of actual like potential
Life-threatening
taking
situation.
life-threatening concerns. Like you don't just pivot into this.
Yeah. Well,
Like
I
that's
think
dangerous for you and anyone you work with."
it's one of the dangers of, everybody having open mics
Yeah.
because they can say whatever you want, and then people, I think people get gravitate to what they feel is what the answer they wanna hear.
Right, right.
So when
Yeah.
the people say the thing that people wanna hear, and it might not be what you really need.
Mhm.
I think it's harder for people to hear something that's gonna challenge you.
When the
So
algorithm stuff's interesting too, because like the research they've done with how like some like young men end up in these really like toxic spaces is like
like the
they're actually
growth
usually
stage,
searching for personal development growth, and then the algorithm will feed them some things, and then they start getting into these really like negative
toxic male, yeah, toxic,
spaces.
yeah,
And
like
so
the
it's
bro
scary and sad for them. So
yeah, the bro culture just kinda keeps on bringing the toxic male and reinforcing it.
yeah, it's kind of like people using like dark psychology kind of principles to be like, use polarization, division, rile up all these like make you feel really validated and get you angry and do this. And then it's like, now you're aligned with me and I can keep driving this extreme. I
It's
mean,
like,
people have used that since the beginning of time.
like the art of war, divide and conquer. Like
Yeah.
people take things that they know work. They go through
Yeah.
history, they do this research. They might get a little dangerous,
Hmm.
but they're come into it, and maybe they're not initially nefarious, but
Yeah.
when they
Yeah.
start doing something and it's really not adding value, then you got to start questioning. It's like, okay, well,
Yeah, I think
I'm
most of the stuff out there is like like I think people are
unintentional.
mostly good or trying to do their best. Oftentimes we don't know what we don't know. I think a lot of it's unintentional and especially when you're holding like energetic space and in a healer role, like you really got to be doing your own shadow work and be aware of your own subconscious
Mm.
stuff. So a lot of times it can be people not doing that.
So they got to kind of
Yeah.
gut check, and then like you do need somebody to kind of be the beta reader or like check what you're doing.
Hmm.
And if you're not, if you don't like criticism, it's like if you get red marked when you put your
Yeah.
book out, right? You put your book out, you
Yeah.
get your beta readers, and they come back, and the editors come
Yeah.
back. It's like, well, you need to change. Then you don't
Yeah.
want to do it. It's like, well, I'm
Yeah.
just going to self publish it the way
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah.
It's like, man, that's not the best place to be coming from.
Yeah. It's gonna be open to learning and being like, okay, maybe a lot of harm is unintentional, but we can still look at what we've done and be like, okay, I can see why that was harmful and I can do better next time.
Yeah, and we've talked
Yeah.
about the red flags, and in terms of like looking at spiritual healers, right? In terms of like if it's too good to be true, and other things that you've mentioned. Maybe 3 lessons learned that you could provide.
From the red flag part?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it's like, I mean, yeah, like it's just I'd say be aware of people who think they have all the answers. Like if there's kind of a god complex, like any use of fear or control type tactics, like if they seem really invested or like upset with you of like you have to do it this way, like run away. um, yeah. Also, the like psychic ability doesn't mean like integrity. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean there's also like personality dynamics, there's emotional maturity to be aware of. Like those are just important lessons for adults. I think like in adulthood, knowing like, okay, who's emotionally mature, who can be accountable, who can self-regulate, like especially if we're getting into any kind of power dynamic, like a boss,
Mm.
marriage, something. It's like these personality traits, if someone's not doing their work, they can cause trauma to the people involved.
Well, I
But
think that's important that you relayed that. And then, we're kind of coming to the close. I did want to mention your URL. So, katieturnerpsychology.com. People click on that. What do they find their way to talk to you or book with you?
yeah, it would go to kind of the main page. They can take my quiz, get that free piece. I can only work with people in Alberta because that's the place I'm
Alberta.
registered for like
Okay.
therapy services. But even just the phase I'm moving into now is also very intuitively guided for me. So I am in the process of trying to like I have a survey up to see like what do people want to learn more about, to do more like workshops, webinars.
Some stuff like
I
that.
want stuff where it can be like pay based on where you position yourself so more people can benefit from the information and there are less barriers to access it.
That's awesome. Well,
Mhm.
look, so I do encourage everybody who's listening or watching that will be fully clickable in the podcast description on whatever platform you want to watch or listen to the podcast on. And I want to thank you for being on the podcast today. Thank you for being a guest on the Family Like the Ghost podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a great conversation.
Thank you. Have a great. So you're in Canada. So have a great.
Yes.
Awesome. I mean, I'm in New Hampshire. We're not
Nice.
too far away.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Bye.